Welcome to the Bookroom Duo, where we explore a variety of books. Let's get started. Today, we are taking a chronological journey through a genuinely surprising, really delightful deep dive into a book called Work in Progress by James Martin, S.J.
Yes, and I think that SJ part is where a lot of people might get the wrong idea.
Exactly. For anyone listening, you might see that S.J. after the author's name, which stands for Society of Jesus, meaning he's a Jesuit priest, and you immediately brace yourself for this heavy, dense theological textbook.
Right, like a dry sermon on labor.
But that couldn't be further from the truth. The premise here is actually a spiritual memoir, but it's told on a slant. It's cleverly disguised as a hilarious, deeply relatable chronicle of a teenager's absolutely terrible summer jobs, leading all the way up to his adulthood.
That false expectation is really the beauty of this source material. It is just so accessible. I went into his notes expecting that dry sermon, but instead I found these laugh-out-loud funny stories.
Right.
And they actually offer a profound look at how the very concept of work forms our identity.
Yeah, and our mission today is to show you how the grueling, mind-numbing, and utterly embarrassing jobs we all endure in our youth aren't just a means to earn pocket money. They are the crucibles that shape our character. They force empathy onto us, and surprisingly enough, they act as unexpected vehicles for grace.
Which is such a comforting thought for anyone who has ever hated a summer job.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, let's unpack this by starting right at the beginning of the timeline. We're talking about the unpaid hustle of ages 13 and 14. From what I understand, his first foray into the working world was an absolute nightmare of a paper route.
Oh, it was brutal.
It was for some tiny local paper, right? Like, how bad could a paper route really be?
Well, imagine a business model completely designed to make a middle schooler miserable. He was delivering the Conshohocken Recorder in the Pennsylvania suburbs. But the catch was that the homeowners didn't actually subscribe to this paper.
Wait, they didn't subscribe?
No, it was an unsolicited delivery. So he'd ride his bike around, throwing this paper onto people's lawns, rain or shine. But the real kicker was collection day.
Oh, no.
Yeah, once a month he had to clip this heavy metal coin changer to his belt, walk up to those very same houses, and essentially beg the homeowners to pay him $1.15 for a paper they never asked for in the first place.
I mean, I can only imagine the sheer awkwardness of knocking on a stranger's door to demand money for something they probably threw straight into the recycling bin. You'd have to deal with some incredibly hostile reactions.
Hostile is exactly the right word. He writes about constantly dodging snarling Dobermans and German Shepherds.
Just to get $1.15.
Exactly. You have these homeowners holding back furious dogs, telling him they just throw that rag out anyway. Some would even critique his throwing aim. They'd tell him if he expects to get paid, he needs to stop tossing the paper into their rose bushes.
That is so humiliating.
It was. And there's actually this famously mortifying anecdote right in the middle of this era. It's an early morning. He's eaten a bowl of old granola while listening to Paul Simon on the radio, and he heads to his 8th grade English class. They're reading Jack London's classic survival story, To Build a Fire. And in the middle of the lesson, James just spectacularly throws up everywhere.
Oh, my God.
All over the Jack London book. And then when his poor teacher, Mrs. Donnelly, tries to physically help him to the bathroom, he accidentally throws up on her too.
No. That is the absolute peak of early adolescent misery right there. The physical discomfort combined with the social humiliation. Was he trying to make money any other way, or was the paper route his only source of income?
He was desperately trying to find alternatives, which led him to the classic neighborhood lawn mowing business.
Ah, rite of passage.
Right. I actually had a brief stint doing that myself when I was his age. And just like James, I absolutely despised it. You have the sweltering summer heat, stepping on ground bee nests, dealing with poison ivy.
And the clients?
Oh, the neighborhood critics. He had one neighbor, Mrs. Burke, who would pop her head out of the window at 8 in the morning to complain about the noise. And then she'd proceed to give him impossibly detailed, agonizing instructions on exactly how her grass needed to be cut.
So he is just out there sweating, nodding along to Mrs. Burke, probably calculating that tiny $10 payout in his head just to survive the interaction. What strikes me is that at this age, it doesn't seem like he actually wanted to work at all. It sounds like he just wanted the cash.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly these early adolescent attempts at work reveal our natural human resistance to responsibility. We all start out exactly like that.
Oh, for sure.
You probably remember that exact feeling from your own teenage years. You want the prestige of having a job, you want the pocket money to go buy records and movie tickets, but you absolutely recoil at the sweat, the boredom, and the sheer discomfort required to get it.
It's the ultimate reality check.
Exactly. And James was no different. His ideal alternative to all this physical labor was just sitting on his back porch in a green plastic chaise lounge. He just wanted to read books about Bigfoot, UFOs, and poltergeists by an author named Brad Steiger.
Sounds like a great summer, honestly.
Or he'd read Gene Shepard's humorous stories about growing up during the Depression. It is the absolute baseline from which our work ethic has to grow.
Which brings us to a major upgrade. The summer of 1976. James is 15, and from what the text says, he finally lands a real, official, paying job at $2.30 an hour at a place called the Ice Cream Inn.
A big step up from the paper route.
And since this is 1976 in the Philadelphia suburbs, I have to imagine this place is ground zero for bicentennial madness.
Oh, it was peak bicentennial chaos. Think tricorn hats and American flag logos plastered on absolutely everything.
All right.
But inside the Ice Cream Inn, James finds himself at the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy. He's hired as a busboy and dishwasher.
So not the glamorous front-of-house scoop guy.
Not at all. It is a sticky, miserable reality. He spends his days washing endless, massive tubs of rum raisin ice cream in a sweltering back room. Meanwhile, the older, cooler teenagers are out front scooping the ice cream, constantly yelling back into the kitchen for him to bring up more of a very unfortunately named Sunday-topping wet nuts.
Just the phrase wet nuts in a busy restaurant kitchen is enough to send a teenager over the edge. Does he ever actually figure out how to handle the pressure of a real restaurant rush?
He tries, but it leads to what might be the funniest disaster in the entire book. It's a busy afternoon. James is running back and forth, sweating through his polyester smock. He comes out of the hot dish room to clear tables and discovers that the entire dining room is completely empty.
Empty during a rush.
Every single table is abandoned, but there's half-eaten food everywhere. Purses left on chairs, half-melted sundaes on the tables. Now remember, he's been spending his summers reading all those Brad Steiger books about UFOs.
Oh no, please don't tell me yes.
His first genuine thought is that the customers might have been abducted by aliens.
Wait, so he is standing in a chaotic 1970s restaurant, completely alone, genuinely pondering an alien abduction. What does he even do in that situation?
He doesn't ask questions. He wants to look like a hyper-efficient employee for his manager. So he just starts bussing. He clears every single table. He scrapes the half-eaten burgers, the melting sundaes, the napkins into his massive metal tray, and shoves it all into the industrial dishwasher.
He threw it all away.
He is feeling incredibly proud of himself for cleaning the whole room so quickly. And then he hears the roar of a crowd returning.
Let me guess. They weren't abducted by aliens.
Not quite. The highly anticipated bicentennial wagon train, which was a literal parade of horse-drawn covered wagons, was rolling past the restaurant on the main road. The entire dining room had just bolted outside to watch it pass.
And they left all their food.
And when they come back inside, hungry and ready to finish their meals, there is absolute chaos. The manager bursts into the kitchen. Customers are screaming about their missing food.
I can feel the panic from here, that sinking feeling in your stomach. What does he do when the customers confront him?
He completely short-circuits. An angry elderly customer barges into the back room demanding the rest of his sundae. James reaches into his gross, slop-filled bussing tray in the sink, pulls out a little silver cup of vanilla ice cream, and presents it to the man.
Out of the sink tray?
Yes. But sticking right out of the top of the pristine vanilla scoop, right where a cherry should be, is a wet, used cigarette butt.
That is a total disaster. I'm cringing just picturing the customer's face. How does he recover from a failure on that scale?
It was humiliating, but what happens later that night is crucial. James's father is driving him home, and James is complaining about the sheer misery of the job. And his father delivers a vital life lesson.
What does he tell him?
He says, of course it's not fun. Why do you think they call it work? If it were fun, they'd call it play.
Wow.
Think about your own first massive screw-up at work. We all have one. Those agonizing moments are exactly where you learn resilience. You learn that you can survive a catastrophic mistake, and you learn the very necessary, deeply uncomfortable art of the apology.
He definitely needed that resilience because the next summer, at age 16, he decides he is completely done with hot dish rooms. He sets his sights on what he thinks will be a glamorous outdoor job.
Right, the golf course.
Exactly. His older cousin Tommy is an assistant golf pro and manages to get him a gig as a caddy at the highly prestigious Philadelphia Cricket Club. The only problem is, James knows absolutely nothing about golf.
Nothing at all. He is out there on his first day, internally panicking because he doesn't know a wedge from a putter. To make matters worse, he is completely terrified of getting struck by lightning while standing next to a bag of metal poles in an open field.
That's a valid fear, honestly.
So he is just out there trying to project this cool, knowledgeable facade, terrified the wealthy golfers are going to realize he is a total fraud.
If you, as a listener, have ever walked into a new job and furiously nodded along while someone explained a software system you have never heard of in your life, you know exactly how James felt on that golf course. It is the universal experience of faking it until you make it.
It perfectly captures the quintessential teenage experience of imposter syndrome. You are just using context clues, hoping nobody realizes you don't actually know the rules of the game you're playing. And it certainly didn't help that the job completely busted his illusion of a leisurely stroll outdoors.
Oh, right, because he wasn't just walking leisurely.
No, he ends up doing something called cart caddying. This means two golfers ride ahead in a motorized cart, and James has to literally sprint behind them across the soft grass, carrying a heavy third golf bag, just to keep up. It was physically brutal work.
So, unsurprisingly, moving into his later high school years, he retreats back indoors. He gets a job as an usher at the cinema on the mall, which seems to bring its own unique brand of misery.
A very greasy brand of misery.
He's locked in a solitary, windowless room making popcorn for 10 hours straight, emerging completely covered in this fluorescent orange Several salt grease. And he mentions the absolute worst task was changing the marquee letters at night.
Yes, climbing a rusty ladder by the highway, swatting away massive swarms of moths and beetles drawn to the lights, all while teenagers in passing cars hurl insults at him. But the real turning point in his high school working life happens at a different summer job.
The factory job.
Right. He takes a position at a factory called Sharp Services. It's an assembly line. And his sole responsibility is packing Unisom sleeping pills into boxes. It is deeply mind-numbing work. The workers are so bored that they would purposely throw a metal ruler into the gears in the conveyor belt just to break the machine.
Just for a break.
It would create this horrible clattering noise, and they'd get a 10-minute break while a mechanic came to fix it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Amidst all this adolescent goofing off and factory boredom, there is a profound, jarring shift in his perspective. It's not just about the misery of the work anymore.
Exactly. James finds himself standing next to an older, quiet woman on the line. He describes her as looking a bit like Dorothy Day, the famous Catholic social activist, with this quiet, weathered dignity. She had wispy gray hair, high cheekbones, and was very taciturn.
And then something happens with the air conditioning, right?
Yes, one sweltering day, the factory air conditioning is failing, and she's wearing short sleeves. As the pillboxes fly by on the belt, James notices a faded tattoo of numbers or letters on her forearm. Being a naive teenager, he casually points to it and asks her what it means, and she simply replies with one word: Dachau.
A Nazi concentration camp. I can't even imagine the absolute silence that must have followed. To be a teenager complaining about being bored and suddenly colliding with that level of historical trauma.
He was stunned. He stands over that whirring conveyor belt for hours, feeling this overwhelming mix of pity, sadness, and sheer embarrassment at his own ignorance. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the exact moment James's safe, suburban bubble bursts.
It really puts the complaints about the bicentennial wagon train into perspective.
It does. These menial, repetitive jobs force us out of our comfort zones. They place us shoulder to shoulder with people we would never otherwise cross paths with in our daily lives. Suddenly, he is exposed to the profound, unimaginable suffering and the deep histories of the people standing right next to him on the assembly line. It elevates work from just a way to buy record albums into a profound encounter with humanity.
That newfound sense of humanity and empathy starts to carry over into his college years. He gets a job as a bank teller doing this long commute on the A-bus into downtown Philadelphia. And he is apprenticed to this wonderful, cynical, curly-haired older woman named Ethel.
Ethel is a great character.
Her personal motto, as she stared out at the crowds waiting for the bank doors to open every morning, was always, "The masses are asses."
The bank teller stories are incredible because they perfectly illustrate the sheer, unadulterated panic of dealing with the general public. We all know the public can be terrifying. He shares this story of a fellow teller who was so intimidated by a suspicious-looking man demanding all her large bills that she literally faked fainting.
She just dropped.
She just collapsed behind the counter onto the floor to avoid dealing with him.
That is an amazing defense mechanism. But James is also living a double life during this era, isn't he? By day, he's wearing a tie, counting cash, trying to be a responsible adult at the bank. But on the weekends, what is he doing?
On the weekends, he is living it up down the Jersey Shore with his buddy John. It is the classic chaotic college experience. They are crabbing in the bay, staying out at bars until 2 in the morning, and getting horrific sunburns. James gets such a bad sunburn on the tops of his feet that he can barely squeeze them into his leather loafers for work on Monday morning.
Eventually, those two worlds inevitably crash. You can only burn the candle at both ends for so long. He spends a wild night riding the Rolling Thunder roller coaster, which went backwards, and stays out all night.
A recipe for disaster.
The next day, after eating a massive cheesesteak for lunch, the sheer exhaustion hits him. He falls dead asleep while standing straight up at his teller window in the middle of a busy afternoon. Customers are literally tapping on the thick glass, fruitlessly trying to wake him up before finally giving up in disgust and moving over to Ethel's line.
It's a hilarious image, but it highlights a profound insight Martin makes about the work hard, play hard culture. We're all sold in our 20s. We try to completely compartmentalize our professional and personal lives. But eventually, the exhaustion of maintaining that double life catches up to you.
You can't separate them forever.
And that falling asleep at the window really marks the end of that carefree era for him. Because after college, things get very serious very quickly. He graduates from the prestigious Wharton School of Business. He is completely determined to be the ultimate corporate tool. He buys the khaki suits. He goes on the aggressive interviews.
And he still manages to mess them up. I read that he had a disastrous interview with Salin Brothers where he accidentally insulted commercial banking right to the face of a senior commercial banker.
Not a great move.
But he eventually lands a highly coveted, very lucrative job in corporate finance at GE Capital in New York. However, it seems like the office culture there is just as absurd as the ice cream inn, just with better pay.
It really was. He writes about this bizarre executive tradition called Elvis Day. A senior coworker demanded total, absolute silence from the entire office, meaning you had to stop typing and physically hang up your phone calls whenever an Elvis Presley song happened to play on the radio. It was this strange, forced corporate quirkiness.
So he's making real money, he's wearing the expensive suits, he's living the 1980s corporate dream. But it sounds like a very hollow victory, because right as he achieves all this, there is a sudden, deeply tragic turning point that completely shifts the tone of his life.
Yes. His close college roommate and dear friend, Brad, the guy he used to joke around with back at Penn, dies by suicide. It is a devastating, life-altering blow. And you can see how this profound tragedy completely shatters his worldview. You have to realize, corporate cultures, like the one he was in at GE Capital, are entirely unequipped to handle real human grief.
Of course. There's no space for it.
Suddenly, the focus on money, the obsession with climbing the corporate ladder, the supposed prestige of his title, it all feels incredibly empty. It prompts this deep internal crisis. He starts returning to church, trying to find some anchor in the storm, and starts questioning the very meaning and purpose of his life. The hunger he had for corporate success completely evaporates. He realizes he is spiritually starved.
So how does he get from a grieving corporate finance guy in New York to becoming a Jesuit priest? What is the bridge there?
It comes down to a very quiet, mundane moment in his apartment. He is sitting alone, eating leftover spaghetti and meatballs. He's flipping channels on the TV, trying to avoid watching a rerun of Cheers, and he lands on PBS.
And what's on?
There was a documentary playing, narrated by Alexander Scourby, about a man named Thomas Merton. Merton was a Trappist monk, which is a very strict contemplative religious order. Now, what's amazing here is that James admits he knew absolutely nothing about monks or theology or even the Bible at this point in his life.
Really? Nothing at all?
He literally thought the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat was just a neat story with a surprise ending. He didn't even know it was an adaptation from the book of Genesis.
That's a wild leap. So what does this all mean for his career? He just watches a documentary and quits.
It's the catalyst. Something about Merton's life of quiet contemplation on that screen completely captivated him. He goes out and devours Merton's famous autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain. And it sparks this massive realization that the corporate world, the money, the status, it just wasn't enough. It wasn't what he was built for. So in the ultimate plot twist, he leaves his lucrative corporate finance job to novitiate the training period to become a Jesuit priest.
And there is this beautiful full circle moment when he first arrives at the novitiate, right? As a novice, one of his very first chores is to clean the community kitchen. Another Jesuit hands him an industrial mop and a bucket of soapy water.
Just like his old jobs.
And as he takes that mop, he flashes all the way back to when he was 15 years old, late at night, mopping the floors with his manager at the ice cream inn. He remembers the quiet satisfaction of making something dirty clean again, of doing a small, humble task well. He realizes that all of it, the humiliating paper route, the sticky rum raisin ice cream, the terrifying golf course, the mind-numbing pill factory, all those terrible, seemingly pointless jobs, actually prepared him for this exact life of service.
This raises an important question, and it's one we should all be asking ourselves as we look at our own career paths and the daily grinds we endure. If grace and deep empathy and profound life lessons can be found in a sticky puddle of rum raisin ice cream or standing over a monotonous factory assembly line, what hidden meaning is waiting to be uncovered in the most frustrating, boring parts of your daily routine right now?
Thanks for joining us. Subscribe for more bookish adventures and hit that like button if you enjoyed the ride. Don't forget to share the knowledge, spread the word.